Welcome to Brother Miller's Notes. Thank you so much for spending a little time with me as we look at Alma 53 to 63. A little bit more of the war chapters, and we're going to start off by talking about the Stripling Warriors. This picture was one of my favorites growing up. I would look at them and I would think, that's what I want to be. I was a skinny kid, skinny arms. And I really did want to have a massively overdeveloped upper body, like them. And I thought, ooh, that's what I want to be one day. But the word stripling does not mean massively overdeveloped upper body. It means youth. Now, these youth really were going to fight battles against the Lamanites. And the result was that, in the end, all of them are going to have a lot of wounds, but none are going to perish. And there's a lot of parallels to our day. The youth of our day, in our family, in our ward, in our quorum, in our group, are going to fight battles against the evils of our day. And we want the result to be the same, that none spiritually perish. As Paul said, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." There's a lot of great lessons we can take from these youth, for our youth and for us, because we want our youth, when they get spiritually wounded, to be able to be fortified and enabled to turn their trust to God like this group did. We're going to talk about how they did it. So here's the first thing when we get it, a mention of these youth. They did assemble themselves together. And I emphasize they. It's not mom's idea. It's not dad's idea. It's not the prophet's idea. They, as a group, come together to discuss what's going on. And I think what made them be a group so in tune with the plight of their family and politically and with the war going on? And how do you help your children be like that? Well, I'm just going to back up in this chapter, a couple verses before it, what the parents were doing. The commentary about their parents is that they were, by the power and the word of God, their parents have been converted unto the Lord. And it shows in their attitude, it shows in their actions. There is a tremendous power that parents have when they're righteous. That power extends to what their kids do and how they approach life. Doesn't mean their kids are going to be perfect. No way. But it's a great influence. Now, going back, their parents had buried their weapons of war deep. Parents who want to have a great influence on their kids bury their weapons of, maybe it's their sarcasm, maybe it's the way they treat people, maybe it's just the way they are when they're alone and no one else is around and they think no one can see them. They bury their attitude of sin or whatever deep. They want to get rid of it. They leave their old lifestyle behind. Now, this group of people moved to Zarahemla. But in the past, if you have a past, as a parent, you got to leave that behind because you're going to be the example to your kids. The parents were moved with compassion. They see the plight of the Nephites. War is not going well. They're in trouble. And the Nephites have spent a lot of time defending this group. And so they've made a covenant when they buried their weapons of war deep, not to take them up again and shed blood. And they're like, you know what? It's not worth it. We've got to take an action. And they're desirous to help out or willing to. And that kind of caught me because, just a little parallel to us, we got to be willing to help out. I mean, isn't that part of our sacrament prayer? We're willing to. For me, it's a key. I'm willing to keep the commandments. I'm willing to be a part of this covenant. And I want to. They, as parents, had made and kept covenants. Now, if I just summarize all this together to one simple sentence. There is a great influence that righteous parents have on their children and their children's actions. It doesn't make their children perfect, or it doesn't guarantee that children will take the right path, but it sure has a strong influence one day that there's always a hope their children will return. Now, I also mentioned a little bit earlier that they were being protected by the Nephites. Now, they were the former enemies. The Nephites gave room for this group to kind of come in by Zarahemla and settle. And they are protecting them during this time of warfare. There is a great spiritual application here of the parents around your family, the one in your ward, in your community, who reach out to protect your kids. They're helping by their example, by what they're teaching. They're influencing your kids. The village is helping to raise your children. And I see that when my kid goes to seminary and another teacher teaches them. I love the influence it has on her. Or when she goes to Young Women's, I love the influence of a righteous Young Women's leader has on her. Or when she meets with a priesthood leader, that wonderful influence that helps reinforce what we're doing in the family. So that generalized summary for me is there's an influence of community that helps our children, helps them become the type of children we want them to become. So now going back, that was just item number one. Now number two is the lessons we can learn from these youth. They strengthen their commitment by making a covenant. Our children can strengthen their commitment to God by making a covenant too. And you think about when were they strengthened? When did they do this? In all cases. And they chose a prophet as their leader. Now, it would have been really cool for them to have chosen Teancum. He seems to have a great military mind. But for them, it's interesting to see they choose Helaman. And I've wondered why. And in my mind, I'm just reading between the lines of Scripture. I bet Mom and Dad have a great love for Helaman. And that love extended into the family, and they love Helaman too. Yea, and they, these youth, did obey and observe and to perform every word of command with exactness. It shows their faith. They just want to do what's right, and most of our youth have a desire to do what's right. They really do. I love the way that's the titles that they call each other. Helaman calls them my sons. These 2,000 Stripling Warriors call Helaman my father. Father-son. That's a loving, trusting relationship they have with the prophet. And I love that. They are exceedingly valiant for their courage. And there's a great cross-reference in Deuteronomy 31:6, and as well as Joshua 1:6-9. And in Deuteronomy 31:6 it says, Be strong and of good courage, fear not, nor be afraid of them, for the Lord thy God, He it is that doth go with thee. He will not fail thee, nor forsake thee. True courage is being valiant in doing what is right. They were true at all times in whatsoever thing they were entrusted. Now, kind of summarizing all these attributes together is what Elder Ballard pictures our young men and our young women being as they serve missions for the Lord. Elder Ballard said, We need now, as the greatest generation of missionaries in the history of the church, we need worthy, qualified, spiritually energized missionaries who, like Helaman's 2,000 Stripling Warriors, are exceedingly valiant for courage and also for strength and activity, and who are true at all times in whatsoever thing they are entrusted. They were men of truth and soberness. Now, soberness is soundness of mind, of self-control. I love that they have that self-control. And the rest of that verse, they had truth and soberness, self-control, because they had been taught to keep the commandments of God and to walk uprightly or unimpaired with integrity before God, before Him. They, this group of youth, did think more upon their fathers and upon their own lives. It's a great verse because, these are youth. And sometimes the youth hits 13, 14, 15, those teenage years, and their attitude turns away from family and others to themselves. It becomes a very kind of a period of selfishness, of self-interest. Their lives are more important than anyone around them. But for these youth, they think more on their fathers. Or today's youth would think more on their fathers and mothers. Maybe you could say more on their heavenly parents. It matters more to them what God thinks of their decisions than what their friends think of their decisions. They had exceeding faith in which they had been taught to believe. They're going to talk about their mothers and their influence, because the shield of faith is not produced in a factory, but in a home. So my favorite quote's from Elder Packer. And in the home, a mother, and for them, the mothers especially, but a mother and a father, forge the shield of faith in the hearts and minds of their kids. Now, this is my favorite picture that I'm going to show you all day. This is after the battle. Now, at this time, there's now 2,060. They have a battle, and you have, there's like 200 that have fainted because they've lost blood. And there's a phrase in Alma 57, verse 25, neither was there one soul among them, this group of 2060, that had not received many wounds. These are warriors who've been battling all day, and they've received wounds. They've taken some hits for the team. And in the spiritual battles, we all receive wounds. And we know it. But I love the next few verses, and they're some of my favorite in the Book of Mormon, because they've received wounds. And here's what they do when they receive the wounds. They put their trust in God continually. They stand fast in liberty wherein God had set them free. And they're strict to remember the Lord their God from day to day. They continue to keep God's statutes and his judgments and his commandments continually. Their faith was strong in the prophecies. They have wounds, and it turns them to God. They know that true healing comes through Christ, our Redeemer. Now I'm going to put a little aside and tell you a story that is one of the greatest battles in all history, because I think it has a lot of parallels to what happens in Alma 58. Now, this is one of those Spartans. This is how they would kind of dress back then. And I just want to tell you a little bit about the Battle of Thermopylae. We have 300 of these that go up against Xerxes, and he has hundreds of thousands of warriors. Now, the night before the battle, Xerxes sends a spy over to the Spartans, and the Spartans are playing games, and they're combing their hair. And the spy comes back to Xerxes and says, here's what they're doing. They're combing their hair. And Xerxes goes, I don't get it. They should be like preparing for war. They should be praying to their God for deliverance. And so he gets this kind of demoted, exiled prince, brings him before him and says, hey, Demaratus, what's going on? Why are they combing their hair? Why are they playing games? And he says, it's kind of his paraphrase, a hard fight was no doubt in preparation, and that it was the custom of the Spartans to array their hair with a special care when they're about to enter into great peril. And so the night before, Spartan king gets a consul from these Persians and says, hey, let's make a truce. And they refuse. And the consuls kind of threaten him and saying, quote, reconsider, as we will shoot so many arrows at you, it will blot out the sun. And these Spartans, they had a very kind of a way of speaking that's kind of like Clint Eastwood. And you just kind of picture Clint Eastwood making this statement. One of these Spartans turns to him and says, so much the better. We shall fight in the shade. And so the Battle of Thermopylae, as the story goes, you have 300 of these Spartans holding a pass, kind of a rear guard action to let everybody else be safe at the Battle of Thermopylae. And as they do it, they fight 300 against a foe that is innumerable to them. And that's Helaman 58. You have 2,060, a little group, fighting an innumerable army. And there's a lot of parallels that really is set up in the first few chapters of the Book of Mormon about this battle that we can apply to our life. Because in 1 Nephi 14, it's great to kind of cross-reference, Satan's army is innumerable. And the spiritual battle of our day against a smaller group, which is the church, their numbers are few. So, last days, the church is few, and Satan's horde is many. And Nephi is seeing that the fight really is against good versus evil. And so, what do you do when you are a part of the little group fighting against an innumerable army? Or today, what do you do when you're fighting against the horde of wickedness? First, you pour out your soul to God. God will not take the battle away, but he will visit you with assurances, give you hope for deliverance, and give peace to your soul. Verse 11 says, yea, it did come to pass, the Lord our God did visit us with assurances, that he would deliver us, yea, insomuch that he did speak peace into our souls, and had granted to us great faith, and had caused us that we should hope for our deliverance in him. He gives us assurances of peace, faith, and hope in the fight against the hordes of evil. And God then gives us courage and a fixed determination to conquer and maintain, and enables us to fight with all of our might. Now, if I could just do a summary of all those things, in the fight against evils of our day, pour out your soul to the Lord, and He will give you assurances of peace, faith, and hope, courage, and a fixed determination. In the end, you will be victorious. Going back to something that I shared last week from Elder Bednar, let me suggest that one of the primary reasons that much information is recorded about war in the Book of Mormon is to help you and me in these latter days appropriately seek the gift of courage. I testify and promise that the courage you will need can be invited into your life through fervent prayer and diligent study of the Book of Mormon. I think that's awesome. We need that courage in our fight against the hordes of evil. Now I'm just going to add one little thought about Captain Moroni's letter to Pahoran. I know this is not the letter. This is like a picture of the Dead Sea Scrolls. But in that letter, it's not the most tactful letter in the world. You read that and you read it with your kids, and it's kind of like, he's right in every detail except for one detail. He got the wrong person. He's accusing the wrong man. And when Pahoran gets it, I love his reply. He says, "And now, in your epistle you have censored me." He could have added in there sarcastically, wrongly. He could have said some kind of remark like, "Mind your own business, I'll mind mine." But he doesn't. He just says, "You've censored me." It doesn't matter. I'm not angry, but to rejoice in the greatness of your heart. One of the greatest indicators of spiritual maturity is revealed in how we respond to the weaknesses, inexperience, and potentially offensive actions of others. Ultimately, it is impossible for another person to offend you or offend me, and indeed, believing that another person offended us is fundamentally false. To be offended is a choice we make. Please remember that you and I are agents endowed with moral agency, and we can choose not to be offended. Now you think of Moroni's letter to Pahoran, where he accuses him of something. You could also maybe think of it as like a letter to a parent. Hey, you've neglected us. And sometimes the child doesn't understand everything. But Pahoran's response is classic. I'm not offended. I see you just have a great heart. I see the good in you. Let's work together. Pahoran's desire is to unify, strengthen, and fight together. So just some ideas in teaching, maybe some of the things I haven't covered in this video. The first one I have. As a parent, there is incredible power in your righteous example. If there's something in your life that your kids are seeing that you're doing that might not be the best, change it. Because I believe that it will make a great difference in their life. You could ask if you're in a family setting, and you're talking about these Stripling Warriors, you kind of underline, you're highlighting some of these things. It's great to ask, okay, which of your friends are like these Stripling Warriors? My guess is every single youth will identify one of their friends or someone at school. They're like the Stripling Warriors. And then just say, please tell us more about them. I think we have them in every ward and in every school. And it's great to be able to say, that's the kind of kid. And as a side note, I'll ask this in my classes. And sure enough, there'll be one class where they'll say a name, and I've got one of those students in my other class. And I'll just the next day, I'll say the same thing, ask the same question. I'll say, hey, just so you know, we had someone in our class who was identified from another class, and they were just like that. We have them all around us. And I'm grateful for that. In our spiritual warfare, remember to pour out your soul, and the Lord will give you assurances, peace, faith, hope, courage, and a fixed determination. In the end, you will be victorious. And going back to what Elder Bednar said, just think about what did the war chapters teach you about the gift of courage? How did it help you get the gift of courage in the fight against the hordes of evil of our day? And remember, when someone censures you, you need to remember not to become offended, but rejoice in the greatness of their hearts. Now, normally I'd end here, but I want one last concluding comment from President Ezra Taft Benson. You have been born at this time for a sacred and glorious purpose. It is not by chance you have been reserved to come to earth in this last dispensation of the fullness of times. Your birth at this particular time was foreordained in the eternities. You are to be the royal army of the Lord in the last days. In the scriptural battles you are waging, I see you as today's sons of Helaman. Remember well the Book of Mormon account of Helaman's 2,000 stripling warriors. Hope you have a lovely day. Bye.